What that means is it is still illegal to just sell cloned meat in Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, today is another example of how everyday Canadians can stop bad policies before they are implemented. The federal government has just announced that due to overwhelming input from consumers and industry, it has paused its plan to deregulate cloned meat. Let's take a look. So, if you weren't aware, this was the original policy change that was actually proposed in Canada. So it says, proposed revised policy on foods derived from SCNT, cloned cattle and swine and their offspring. Based on the conclusions of the scientific opinion, Health Canada's Food and Nutrition Directorate is proposing that these foods should be regulated in the same manner as those from traditionally bred animals. Foods derived from SCNT clones of other animals such as goat, sheep, etc., that is, not cattle or swine, would continue to be novel and require a mandatory pre-market safety assessment. Consequently, foods derived from SCNT cloned cattle and swine and their offspring would no longer be considered novel foods, and as such would no longer be subject to pre-market notification under Division 28, Part B of the Food and Drug Regulations. Manufacturers, producers, and importers of foods derived from these animals would remain responsible for ensuring these products comply with all applicable legislation, including the Food and Drugs Act, Food and Drug Regulations, Safe Food for Canadians Act, Safe Food for Canadians Regulations. Where did this come from? In 2003, Health Canada put in place an interim policy on foods derived from somatic cell nuclear transfer, that's where SCNT comes from, clones and their offspring. The interim policy stated that until more was known about the products of this technology, Health Canada would consider these foods to be captured under the definition of quote-unquote novel food in the Food and Drug Regulations. As such, these foods were subject to the regulations in Division 28, Part B of the Food and Drug Regulations, a mandatory pre-market safety assessment before being sold. This was done at the time because SCNT technology was still in the research and development stage. It was unclear whether there was an impact on the safety and nutritional quality of foods derived from animals generated by SCNT. This was talked about in multiple posts on social media over the last week. We put out our video on this the other day, and the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois, was also on a podcast recently talking about this. And his point, which I completely agree with, is that, listen, it doesn't matter whether or not you've designated this food safe or not. It needs to be labeled. People need to understand what they're actually buying. Now, he was saying there's nothing wrong with the science, and he's saying there's not really any difference between the cloned meat and regular meat, and it's not really cloned meat. Again, long and short of it is they're taking a cow with great genes and they are creating an offspring to clone that cow. So they basically fertilize an egg with that cow's DNA. That cow is born, and then what happens is that cloned cow of the original is then used to breed with other cows and then create more cows, and that is the meat that's actually sold. So it's not direct from the cloned cow, it's the offspring of that cloned cow and a non-cloned cow. But Canadians should still know what they're actually buying, and it should be labeled. So our advice to people was, listen, if you don't like this, contact your MP, contact the Health Canada agency, contact everybody that's responsible for this, contact the minister. It looks like not necessarily based on what we were saying, but it looks like enough industry people and enough consumers actually reached out and said, this is not something that we're interested in right now, that they were actually forced to say, all right, you know what, we're not going to proceed with this. So this is what ended up happening and was released in the last 24 hours. Proposed policy update on foods derived from somatic cell nuclear transfer, or SCNT, clones and their offspring. Health Canada, in collaboration with other departments, applied a rigorous process in reviewing the scientific literature of foods made from cloned cattle and swine. This is summarized in the scientific opinion. The science underpins Health Canada's conclusion that food products made from these animals and their progeny are as safe and nutritious as foods from traditionally bred animals. This is consistent with the interpretation of other trusted jurisdictions. The Government of Canada has received significant input from both consumers and industry about the implications of this potential policy update. The department has therefore indefinitely paused the policy update to provide time for further discussions and consideration. Until the policy is updated, foods made from cloned cattle and swine will remain subject to the novel food assessment. There are currently no approved foods from cloned products on the market in Canada. So what that means is it is still illegal to just sell cloned meat in Canada. You can't do it without going through very, very specific regulations and specific checks, which is why you don't really see it anywhere. So this is a huge, huge win for Canadians across the country. I know a lot of people out there think that there's nothing I can do, and I'm just one person. And as a result of that, it feels like you can't change anything. But as we've said, one person can do a lot. That's how we started our channel. It was just two random Canadians. And we've been able to help move the conversation ahead and educate Canadians on how their government actually works. And some of this is the fruits of that, where we can help Canadians understand this is what you can do. This is what writing a letter can actually impact. So you absolutely can help change the conversation and help influence what policies are and are not implemented in this country just by writing a letter. Not a profane-filled letter, mind you, but a letter. And you can be stern, you can be professional, and get your message across. And let these ministers know that, listen, I'm not for this policy, and there's going to be thousands upon thousands of other Canadians that are not for this policy. So the fact that the government was forced to backpedal on this and was forced to say, you know what, okay, I get it, we're not going to do this policy and we're going to shelve this, means that you have the ability, and your neighbors have the ability, and your friends have the ability. If we all act as one and stop becoming divided, we can affect real change on this country.